Now, Ukraine has again targeted points around the Russian city of St. Petersburg, setting an oil refinery alight and reportedly killing one person. The drone attacks are targeting Vladimir Putin's home city while it hosts a prestigious international business summit. Earlier this week, a similar strike damaged another oil terminal, sending plumes of black smoke into the skies over the city. And the barrage of attacks has forced St. Petersburg to close its airport several times during the economic forum. Bob Murrett is a former vice admiral in the U.S. Navy and he's deputy director of the Institute for Security Policy and Law at Syracuse University, and he joins us now. It's good to have you with us. We've seen one of the largest Ukrainian drone attacks of the war targeting St. Petersburg. What does this tell us about where the conflict is heading?
Yeah, Tommy, good to be back with you again. I think it tells you that the Ukrainians are determined to hold at risk different parts of Russia, both their energy sector and other targets that are of high interest, including maritime-related targets, a Navy base nearby, which was also attacked, that they're capable of doing this and continuing to put pressure upon the Kremlin to hopefully come to some kind of a negotiated solution.
On that note, Ukraine saying it's targeted the city of Kronstadt's naval base as well as a naval arsenal in the region. How significant are these naval targets, at least from a military perspective?
Well, Tommy, thank you for actually asking me a question about a naval matter, because I always appreciate that as a former flag officer in the Navy. But what we're seeing in Kronstadt is probably an expansion of something which is kind of lost in the news, which is the fact that the Ukrainians have really won the maritime war, and certainly in the Black Sea. They have held at risk and really pushed the Russian Navy all the way to the extreme eastern reaches of the Black Sea and other parts, because they can't operate safely there anymore. The other thing, as you say, the attack on the naval base right outside St. Petersburg on the Gulf of Finland is a major point of access for any operations that the Russian Navy may wish to conduct in the Baltic with our NATO allies, Finland, Sweden, and Norway nearby. So holding that at risk as well, I think, is actually sending a strong signal to the Kremlin on things that the Ukrainians are capable of doing to make things far more difficult for not just their ground forces, but also the naval forces.
Speaking of making things more difficult, Russia saying it's intercepted hundreds of drones overnight, yet some of these drones still reached strategic targets. Just wondering if this is becoming a war of attrition against Russia's air defense network as much as against military infrastructure.
Yeah, Tommy, as I say, I think it is a war of attrition, but one that is carefully planned in terms of the target set that the Ukrainians are going after, specifically in their energy sector, notwithstanding the increase in oil prices because of the war relative to the Persian Gulf. Russia is still in a bad place relative to petroleum and other supplies for their own people. They've had to have rationing and cut back in some of the occupied areas of Ukraine and elsewhere. So I think that's just in terms of whatever target set the Ukrainians go after, it makes sense to hold that at risk because it's likely to put more pressure on that small circle of leadership that Putin has inside the Kremlin.
And this comes not long after Vladimir Putin rejected Volodymyr Zelensky's proposal for direct talks. Just wondering if this suggests that Moscow believes it can still achieve its military objectives.
Yeah, Tommy, they may believe they can, but they really can't. I mean, as you know, the discussion about both within Russia relative to Ukraine has kind of shifted. They're talking about the post-Putin era now, which is something that really just emerged in the last couple of months. The other thing is the battlefield realities have changed really just in the last 2 months or so. Ukraine has been successful in clawing back some additional territory. They've actually done tactical level mechanized infantry attacks, which is new, something we haven't seen in some time there. It had some significant successes on the battlefield. So I think it's continuing to wrap up the pressure on Kremlin and a small circle of people there, and also changing the discussion, as we were saying, inside of Russia.
And the sort of US-led peace efforts appear to be stalling or stalled. At this point, do you see either side acting as if, negotiations could happen again, or are they just sort of preparing for a prolonged war?
Yeah, Tommy, I think negotiations are always taking place, directly or indirectly. That applies not just to Ukraine and Russia, but also relative to things that are happening in the Middle East. There's just constant communications. But I think they are stalled for good reason. I think relative to any U.S. sponsorship, there's been some pressure put upon Kyiv to cede a vital territory that they have from a strategic standpoint in the Donbass and Donetsk. It's called the Fortress Belt. To be foolish for the Ukrainian people to just give that over to the Russians, it wouldn't make any sense, and it would be put at hazard not just Kyiv and other cities, but really the entire eastern part of Ukraine, because the Fortress Belt has tremendous operational experience and importance. So I think they're going to stay in that place for a while until Putin and his team come off their maximalist demands that they want to have, not just for Ukraine, but also for other countries in Western Europe, to what they call reset the conditions for the relationship between Russia and the European countries.
Yeah, I guess it's one thing to plan for a prolonged war. It's another to be able to actually sustain it, with the manpower, with the equipment, with everything. Where do you see this heading in that point?
Yeah, hopefully a diplomatic solution sooner rather than later, Tommy, and one that would, this is a tragedy for the Russian people. They're taking horrific casualties, which the Kremlin doesn't seem to be terribly concerned about. I mean, tens of thousands of people every month, they're soldiers, and the Ukrainians are, the ratio of casualties Russia to Ukraine continues to be very, very lopsided. And the lack of interest that the Kremlin has in the horrific casualties they've been taking, up to more than 300,000 killed in action, is noteworthy and really just a tragedy. The other point I would make on that is, and there's absolutely no question from a neutral standpoint, that the military leadership in Ukraine is far, far better than the Russian military leadership. What they have achieved, and Ukraine does have the most operationally capable and effective army in Europe by a long, long stretch. And we're continuing to see evidence of that every day, and even some changes, as we talked about earlier, just in the last month or two, for increased battlefield successes.
Bob Murrett, we appreciate your insights. Thank you for speaking to us.
It's good to see you, Tommy. Good day.